The night Stella Foster first counted stars aloud in the high desert of New Mexico territory, she had no idea her words would change everything. But that was how miracles tended to happen in 1878, sudden and unexpected like summer storms over Lincoln. She stood outside the small adobe house where she had been living for 3 months now, ever since the stagecoach that carried her west finally deposited her in this dusty town, where lawlessness and hope seemed to exist side by side. The stars were impossibly bright here, brighter than they had ever been back in Philadelphia, where the coal smoke and city lights dimmed the heavens. Here in the high desert, they burned with an intensity that made her heart ache with something she could not quite name. 147, 148, 149, she whispered to the darkness, her voice barely carrying on the cool night air. She had started counting them the first night she arrived, a habit born of loneliness and wonder combined. The vastness of the sky made her feel small but not insignificant, as if she were part of something larger than herself. "That is a lot of stars, miss." She gasped and spun around, her hand flying to her chest where her heart hammered against her ribs. A man stood in the shadows near the corner of the house, tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat. She could see the outline of him in the starlight, the way he held himself still as if trying not to spook a nervous horse. "You startled me," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady even though her pulse raced. She had learned quickly that showing fear in Lincoln was a mistake. The town was still raw from the violence of the past year, the Lincoln County War leaving scars on the land and the people alike. "I apologize, madam. That was not my intention." He stepped forward slightly, enough that she could see his face now. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that looked almost black in the dim light. There was something careful in the way he moved, a deliberate gentleness that seemed at odds with the gun belt slung low on his hips. "I was checking the perimeter when I heard you counting. Thought someone might be in distress at first. Checking the perimeter." She relaxed slightly, recognition dawning. "You must be one of the men Mr. Chisholm hired for security. I heard he was bringing in extra hands after the troubles." "Yes, madam. Owen Kane at your service." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was both polite and somehow old-fashioned, a remnant of a more genteel time that seemed out of place here on the frontier. "I started this week. Mr. Chisholm wants to make sure the decent folks in town can sleep easy." Stella studied him for a moment, taking in the worn but clean clothing, the careful way he kept his hands visible and away from his weapon. She had become good at reading men in the months since her arrival, a necessary skill for a single woman trying to make her way as a schoolteacher in a town where women were scarce and violence was common. "Stella Foster," she said finally, offering a small smile. "I teach at the schoolhouse, though I suspect you already knew that. There are not many strangers in Lincoln." "No, madam, there are not." He returned her smile, and she noticed the way it softened his features, made him look less like a hired gun and more like a regular man. "But I did not know you were in the habit of counting stars. Do you do this often?" She felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "It must seem foolish. I suppose it is, really. You cannot actually count all of them. But there is something comforting about it, trying to put numbers to infinity." "I do not think it is foolish." His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "I think it is beautiful." The words hung between them in the cool night air, and Stella found herself unable to look away from him. There was something in his gaze, a loneliness that matched her own, a hunger for beauty in a world that seemed determined to be ugly. "Would you like to help me?" The question surprised her even as she asked it. She was not usually so forward, but something about this moment, this man, made her bold. Counting, I mean. Though I warn you, I will probably lose track and have to start over. Owen Kane was quiet for a long moment, and she thought perhaps she had overstepped, been too familiar with a man she had just met. But then he moved closer, tilting his head back to look up at the vast expanse of stars overhead. "I would like that very much," he said. "Though I have to admit, I have never been much good at mathematics." She laughed, a bright sound that surprised them both. "Neither have I, truth be told. I teach reading and writing, not numbers, but the counting is not really the point." "What is the point then?" He turned to look at her, genuine curiosity in his expression. Stella considered the question, trying to put into words something she had never fully articulated even to herself. "The point is that they are there. All those stars, all that light traveling across distances we cannot even imagine, just to reach us here on this little patch of earth. The counting is just my way of acknowledging them, of saying I see you, you matter." 150, Owen said softly, his eyes still on the sky. 151, 152. She joined him, their voices blending in the darkness. 153, 154, 155. They counted together until they lost track somewhere around 300. And then they started over, and Stella realized she was smiling wider than she had in months. This strange man, with his gentle voice and careful movements, had given her something she had not known she needed: companionship in her wonder, someone to share the vast beauty of the night sky. "I should let you get back inside," Owen said eventually, though he sounded reluctant. "It is getting late, and I do not want to keep you from your rest. You have students to teach tomorrow." 7 of them, she confirmed. "Though attendance varies depending on whether their families need them for work. It can be frustrating, but I understand. Survival comes first out here." "It does," he agreed. "But what you are doing, teaching these children to read and write, that is survival too. Just a different kind. You are giving them tools they will need to build something better than what we have now." His words touched something deep in her chest, a validation she had craved without realizing it. So many people dismissed her work as frivolous, a luxury the frontier could not afford. But Owen understood. He saw the value in it. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you might think." "I meant it." He touched his hat again, that same old-fashioned gesture. "Good night, Miss Foster. Perhaps I will see you tomorrow night if you are counting stars again." "Perhaps you will," she said, unable to keep the hope from her voice. "Good night, Mr. Kane." She watched him disappear into the darkness, his footsteps barely making a sound on the hard, packed earth. Only when he was completely gone did she turn and go back inside, her small house suddenly feeling less lonely than it had before. The next day passed slowly, each hour dragging as Stella tried to focus on her lessons. Her students, ranging in age from 6 to 14, were restless in the late spring heat, their attention wandering to the open windows where dust devils danced in the street. She could hardly blame them when her own thoughts kept drifting to the night before, to dark eyes and a gentle voice counting stars. "Miss Foster, are you feeling well?" Little Emma Harrison, one of her most dedicated students, looked up at her with concern. "You seem distracted." Stella realized she had been staring out the window for several minutes, her chalk hovering above the slate board where she had been writing vocabulary words. "I am fine, Emma. Just a bit warm. Let us continue with our lesson." But her mind would not settle, and by the time she dismissed the children for the day, she felt wound tight as a spring. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that one conversation in the dark did not mean anything, that Owen Kane had probably just been being polite and would not come back. Still, as soon as the sun began to set, she found herself outside, looking up at the first stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue sky. She waited until full darkness fell, until the Milky Way blazed overhead in a river of light, before she began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She had reached 20 when she heard his voice join hers. 21, 22, 23. Relief and joy flooded through her in equal measure. He had come back. Owen stepped into view, and even in the starlight she could see he was smiling. "I hope you do not mind," he said. "I found myself looking forward to this all day." "So did I," she admitted. "I was afraid you would think me silly for doing this again." "Not silly. Necessary." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "I realized today that I have been in Lincoln for a week, and I have not once stopped to look up. Not really. I have been so focused on watching for threats, scanning the shadows, that I forgot there was beauty too. You reminded me." They fell into an easy rhythm, counting together and losing track and starting over, talking between the numbers about small things and large ones. She learned that he had grown up in Kansas, that his parents had died of cholera when he was 15, that he had drifted west working cattle drives and ranch jobs until Mr. Chisholm hired him. He learned that she had come from Philadelphia, that she had no family left after her father died, that she had answered an advertisement for a teacher in New Mexico Territory because she wanted a fresh start somewhere far from the memories that haunted her. "You miss it?" Owen asked. "Philadelphia, I mean. The civilization, the culture." Stella considered the question, her eyes still on the stars. "Sometimes. I miss music, real concerts with orchestras. I miss libraries, buildings full of books just waiting to be read. I miss the anonymity of it, being able to walk down a street without everyone knowing your business." "But," he prompted, hearing the unspoken word in her tone, "but I do not miss feeling small in a bad way. In the city, I was just another person, replaceable and insignificant. Here I matter. What I do matters. The children I teach, they need me, and the sky." She gestured upward at the vast canopy of stars. "I never saw the sky in Philadelphia, not like this. I did not know it could be so beautiful." "Count me in your forever," Owen said suddenly, the words coming out in a rush as if he had been holding them back and could no longer contain them. Stella turned to look at him, confusion and something else, something that felt like hope swirling in her chest. "What?" He met her gaze, his dark eyes serious and intent. "You said the counting was your way of acknowledging the stars, of saying they matter. Well, I want to matter too. I want to be counted among the things you acknowledge, the things you see value in. Count me in your forever, Stella." Her breath caught in her throat. They had known each other for 2 days, spent perhaps 3 hours together total, and yet his words resonated in her soul like they had been waiting there all along for him to speak them. She thought about forever, about what that meant out here, where violence could end a life in a heartbeat, where the future was always uncertain. But she also thought about the connection she felt to this man, the way he saw her, really saw her, in a way no one else ever had. "Owen," she said softly, his name feeling right in her mouth. "I am counting you. Right now, in this moment and in all the moments to come, you are counted." He reached for her hand, his fingers rough and calloused against her softer skin, and they stood together in the darkness, not counting stars anymore, but simply being, simply existing in the same space and time and knowing it meant something. The days that followed developed a pattern. Owen would work during the day, riding the perimeter of town with the other men Mr. Chisholm had hired, keeping watch for rustlers and troublemakers. Stella would teach her students, drilling them in their letters and numbers, reading to them from the few precious books she had brought west. And at night, they would meet beneath the stars and talk and count, and fall deeper into something neither of them could fully name but both recognized as precious. It was on the 8th night that Owen asked her to walk with him beyond the edge of town, to a spot he had found where the view was unobstructed by buildings or trees. She should have said no, should have been more careful of her reputation, but she trusted him in a way that defied logic. They walked in comfortable silence, their boots crunching on the rocky ground, until they reached a small rise that looked out over miles of open desert. The stars seemed even brighter here, even more numerous, and Stella felt tears prick her eyes at the sheer beauty of it. "I wanted to show you this," Owen said, his voice quiet in the vast stillness. "I thought you would appreciate it." "It is magnificent," she breathed. "I have never seen anything like it." They sat down on a flat rock, shoulders touching, and for a long while they just looked at the sky. Then Owen spoke, his voice carrying a weight she had not heard before. "I have to tell you something, and I am afraid it will change how you see me." Fear clutched at her heart, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "The reason Mr. Chisholm hired me, the reason I am good at what I do, is because I have experience. Experience with violence, with gunfights. I have killed men, Stella. Not many, and always in what I believed was self-defense or the defense of others, but still. I have taken lives." She absorbed this information, turning it over in her mind. She had suspected as much, had seen the way he wore his gun, the careful watchfulness that never fully left him. But hearing him say it aloud was different. "Do you regret it?" she asked finally. "Every day," he said without hesitation. "Every single day. Even when I knew it was necessary, even when it was them or me, I regret that the world is such that those were the only choices. I regret that I have that darkness in me." Stella reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "The darkness is not in you, Owen. The darkness is in the world, in the circumstances that force those choices. But you are light. You count stars with me. You understand why teaching children to read matters. You see beauty where others only see emptiness. That is who you are." He turned to look at her, and in the starlight she could see the sheen of tears in his eyes. "You make me want to be better. You make me believe I can be." "You already are," she insisted. "You already are." He kissed her then, soft and tentative, asking permission even as he gave it. She kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, all the loneliness and hope and growing love that had taken root in her heart. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "Count me in your forever," she whispered, echoing his words from that first night, "because I am counting you in mine." "Always," he promised. "Always." They sat together watching the stars wheel overhead until the night grew cold enough to drive them back to town. Owen walked her to her door, kissed her hand like a gentleman, and waited until she was safely inside before disappearing into the darkness to resume his patrol. Stella lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about forever, about what it meant to tie her life to someone else's in a place as dangerous and unpredictable as Lincoln. But when she thought about Owen, about his gentle hands and careful heart, the fear faded into something else. Hope, trust, love. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness such as Stella had never known. She and Owen saw each other every night, sometimes just for a few minutes if his work kept him late, sometimes for hours if the town was quiet. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their histories and their dreams, building a foundation of understanding and trust. It was Owen who first mentioned marriage, though he did it in such a roundabout way that she almost missed it. They were counting stars, having reached the 700s before losing track when he said, "Mr. Chisholm mentioned that he is looking to promote someone to foreman of his security operation. It would mean better pay, steady work, maybe even a small house on the property. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity, Stella said, uncertain where he was going with this. It is. But I told him I would need to think about it, because it would mean committing to staying in Lincoln long term, and I did not want to make that decision without consulting you. Her heart began to beat faster. Consulting me? Owen turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Stella, I love you. I know it has only been a few weeks, and by all rights I should take more time, court you properly, but out here time feels different. Every day is a gift, and I do not want to waste any of them. I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I want to marry you, wake up next to you, count stars with you until we are both old and gray. What do you say? Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling so wide it almost hurt. Yes. Yes, Owen, I will marry you. I love you too, so much it terrifies me. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and she felt the rightness of it in her bones. This was where she was meant to be, who she was meant to be with. They decided to marry quickly, not wanting to wait and risk the 1,000 things that could go wrong in Lincoln. The local minister, a kind man named Reverend Miller, agreed to perform the ceremony on a Sunday after church services. Stella had no family to invite, but several of the townspeople who had befriended her promised to attend. Owen asked Mr. Chisholm to stand up with him, and the cattle baron agreed with genuine pleasure. The week before the wedding, Stella threw herself into preparations. She had little money for frills, but she carefully washed and pressed her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Mrs. Harrison, mother of her student Emma, offered to braid flowers into her hair. It would not be the grand affair she might have imagined as a girl in Philadelphia, but it would be real and true and hers. 2 days before the wedding, trouble came to Lincoln. Stella was in the schoolhouse, helping Emma with her reading, when she heard shouting in the street. She moved to the window and saw a group of men on horseback, rough-looking characters with the dust of hard riding on them. They were arguing with someone, though she could not make out the words. Then she saw Owen step into the street, his hand hovering near his gun. Her blood turned to ice. "Emma, I need you to stay here," she said, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "Do not come outside no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" The little girl nodded, her eyes wide with understanding beyond her years. Children in Lincoln learned early what gunfire meant. Stella hurried outside, stopping on the schoolhouse steps where she had a clear view of the confrontation. The leader of the rough men was speaking now, his voice carrying in the still air. "We are just passing through, friend. No need for hostilities." "Then you will not mind surrendering your weapons while you are in town," Owen said calmly. "Mr. Chisholm's orders. No one carries guns in Lincoln except authorized personnel." "And who is going to enforce that? You," the man laughed, ugly and mocking. "I see one hired gun against 5 of us." "I like those odds." Stella's heart hammered in her chest. She looked around desperately for help and saw Mr. Chisholm emerging from the saloon with 3 of his other security men. Relief flooded through her. "The odds just changed," Mr. Chisholm said, his voice carrying authority. "My man gave you a lawful order. You can comply or you can leave. Those are your options." The leader of the rough men looked between Owen and Mr. Chisholm, clearly calculating. Finally, he shrugged. "No need for trouble, boys, let's ride. This town is not worth the hassle." They turned their horses and cantered out of town, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Stella sagged against the doorframe, weak with relief. Owen looked up and saw her, and she could see the tension drain from his shoulders. He crossed to her quickly, climbing the steps 2 at a time. "Are you all right? I should be asking you that," she said, touching his face as if to assure herself he was truly unharmed. "Owen, you could have been killed." "But I was not. Mr. Chisholm had my back, and the men knew they were outmatched. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I am sorry you had to see that. I know it must have frightened you. It did, she admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. It reminded me how easily I could lose you. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. You are not going to lose me. I promise you, Stella, I am going to be careful. I am going to live to be an old man, sitting on a porch somewhere, still counting stars with you. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. 2 more days until we are married. Can we make it 2 more days without more excitement? He smiled, though there was a shadow in his eyes. I will do my very best. Those 2 days passed without incident, and before Stella quite realized it, Sunday arrived. She dressed carefully in her blue cotton dress, her hands shaking slightly as she fastened the buttons. Mrs. Harrison arrived to help with her hair, weaving wildflowers through the braids with gentle fingers. You look beautiful, dear, the older woman said kindly. Owen Kane is a lucky man. I am the lucky one, Stella replied softly. I never thought I would find him, not out here. Love has a way of finding us when we least expect it, Mrs. Harrison said wisely. My Henry found me when I was traveling through on a wagon train. I was supposed to be going to California, but one look at him, and I knew my journey was over. That was 20 years ago, and I have never regretted staying. The church was small and simple, rough wooden pews and a plain altar, but it was full of people when Stella arrived. It seemed the whole town had turned out for the wedding, curious to see the schoolteacher marry one of Chisholm's security men. She saw her students in the front row with their families, Emma grinning at her with obvious delight. But she only had eyes for Owen, standing at the altar in a new shirt she suspected he had spent precious money on. He looked nervous and happy and so handsome it made her breath catch. When his eyes met hers, everything else faded away. Reverend Miller performed the ceremony with simple dignity, speaking of love and commitment and the bonds that tied 2 souls together. Stella barely heard the words, too focused on Owen's face, on the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Do you, Owen Kane, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Owen said firmly, his voice clear and strong. And do you, Stella Foster, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Stella said, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Owen, you may kiss your bride. He did, sweetly and thoroughly, and the small church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and Stella felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The town threw them a celebration in the saloon, which had been hastily cleaned up for the occasion. There was food and music, a fiddle player coaxing lively tunes from his instrument while people danced and laughed. Stella danced with Owen, with Mr. Chisholm, with several of the other townsmen, but she always came back to her husband. Her husband. The word still felt new and wonderful in her mind. As the sun began to set, Owen took her hand and led her outside, away from the noise and celebration. They walked to their new home, the small house on Mr. Chisholm's property that came with Owen's promotion to foreman. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Welcome home, Mrs. Kane, Owen said, sweeping her up into his arms and carrying her across the threshold. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. I like the sound of that, Mrs. Kane. He set her down gently inside, and they stood together in the gathering dusk, looking around at the space they would fill with their lives and love. There was not much furniture yet, just a bed and a table and a few chairs, but they would build it up slowly. "Should we count stars on our wedding night?" Stella asked, only half joking. Owen smiled and pulled her close. "Every night for the rest of our lives, but maybe tonight we start a little later." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and she responded in kind, pouring all her love and desire into it. They made their way to the bedroom, shedding clothes and inhibitions, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Their lovemaking was sweet and intense, a physical expression of the emotional bond they had forged under the stars. Later, they lay tangled together in the sheets, the night breeze cooling their heated skin. True to his word, Owen led her outside to the porch where they sat wrapped in a blanket, looking up at the sky. "1, 2, 3, Stella began softly. 4, 5, 6, Owen continued. They counted together, losing track somewhere around 100, and starting over, not caring about the numbers but only about being together, about this moment and all the moments to come. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Stella's life. She continued teaching, though she often had to navigate the curious questions of her students about married life. Owen excelled in his new role as foreman, earning the respect of the men who worked under him and the trust of Mr. Chisholm. They fell into routines, comfortable patterns of daily life punctuated by moments of joy and tenderness. It was 3 months into their marriage when Stella first suspected she might be pregnant. She was exhausted all the time, falling asleep over her lesson plans in the afternoon. Certain smells made her stomach turn, and her monthly courses were late. She waited another 2 weeks to be sure before telling Owen, afraid to get his hopes up if she was wrong. But she was not wrong. Mrs. Harrison, who had birthed 7 children of her own, confirmed it with a knowing smile. "You are with child, dear. I would stake my life on it." That night, Stella waited until after dinner, until they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset before she spoke. "Owen, I have something to tell you." He turned to her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "No, not unwell. The opposite, actually." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. You are going to be a father." The expression that crossed his face was one of pure wonder, joy so bright it almost hurt to look at. "Truly, we are having a baby." "Truly," she confirmed, laughing at his reaction. "Sometime in the spring, Mrs. Harrison thinks." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight but carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby, our baby. Stella, I cannot believe it. I never thought I would have this, a family of my own." "Well, now you do," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "Now we do." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Stella found the physical changes challenging. She grew round and ungainly, her small frame struggling to accommodate the growing life within. Owen was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest more and work less. She finally had to put her foot down when he suggested she stop teaching altogether. "I am pregnant, not ill," she said firmly. "These children need their education, and I need the purpose it gives me. I promise I will stop if it becomes too much, but right now I am fine." He relented, though she could tell it cost him. His fear of losing her, of losing the baby, was palpable. She understood it, shared it even, but she refused to let fear dictate her life. Winter came to Lincoln, cold and crisp, the stars seeming to shine even brighter in the frozen air. Stella's belly grew large, and by January she had to admit that teaching was becoming difficult. She could barely fit behind her desk, and standing for long periods left her breathless and aching. It was Emma Harrison who suggested the solution. "Why don't you teach sitting down, Miss Foster? I mean, Mrs. Kane. We could all gather around you like story time, but for all the lessons. It worked beautifully, and Stella was able to continue through February, finally stopping in early March when the baby sat so low she could barely walk. Owen was relieved, though he tried to hide it, and she devoted herself to preparing for the baby's arrival. Mrs. Harrison and several other women from town helped her sew baby clothes and blankets, chattering about their own experiences with childbirth. Some of the stories terrified Stella, tales of long labors and complications, but others reassured her. Women had been having babies since the beginning of time. She would be fine. The labor started on a cool March evening, just as the stars were beginning to appear. Stella felt the first contraction while making dinner, a tightening across her belly that made her gasp and grab the counter. Owen was at her side in an instant. "Is it time?" he asked, his face pale with fear and excitement. "I think so," she managed, breathing through another contraction. "You should fetch Mrs. Harrison." He ran like the devil was chasing him, returning minutes later with Mrs. Harrison and two other experienced mothers in tow. They took over with calm efficiency, getting Stella into bed and checking her progress. "It will be a while yet," Mrs. Harrison said. "First babies like to take their time. Owen, you should wait outside." "I want to stay with her," he protested. Stella reached for his hand. "I want him here, please." Mrs. Harrison looked doubtful but relented. "All right, but you follow our instructions and stay out of the way." The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning, long hours of pain that seemed to go on forever. Owen stayed by her side the whole time, letting her squeeze his hand until she thought she might break bones, whispering encouragement and love. When she thought she could not endure another moment, when the pain seemed too much to bear, she would look into his eyes and find the strength to continue. Finally, as the sun was climbing toward noon, Mrs. Harrison said the words she had been longing to hear. "It is time to push, dear. On the next contraction, you push as hard as you can." Stella pushed with everything she had, again and again, until she thought she might split apart. And then, suddenly, there was a release, a sense of something leaving her body, and the room filled with the sound of a baby crying. "It is a boy," Mrs. Harrison announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Stella sobbed with relief and joy as they placed the baby on her chest, still covered in blood and vernix, but perfect, so perfect. Owen was crying too, staring down at his son with wonder and love. "He is beautiful," Owen whispered, "just like his mother." They named him Samuel Owen Kane, Samuel after Stella's father and Owen for his own. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with a surprisingly loud cry for someone so small. Stella had worried that motherhood might feel foreign or overwhelming, but it came naturally to her, as natural as breathing. Owen was a devoted father, waking in the night to help with feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his deep voice that made the baby's eyes drift closed. Watching him with Samuel made Stella fall in love with him all over again. She returned to teaching when Samuel was 3 months old, bringing him to the schoolhouse with her. The children were enchanted with the baby, taking turns holding him gently and making him smile. It was not a conventional arrangement, but this was the frontier. Conventional had no place here. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before, but rich with purpose and love. Samuel grew quickly, rolling over and then crawling and then walking, each milestone a cause for celebration. By his first birthday, he was a sturdy little boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's bright eyes. It was on Samuel's first birthday that Stella realized she was pregnant again. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not said anything, wanting to be sure. This time the confirmation brought excitement rather than fear. They knew what to expect now, were prepared for the challenges ahead. She told Owen that night, after Samuel was asleep, and they were sitting on the porch counting stars as they still did whenever possible. "We are going to have another baby," she said simply. Owen looked at her, surprise and joy dawning on his face. "Another one so soon? I know it is fast, but I am happy about it. Are you happy?" He laughed and pulled her close. "Stella, I am beyond happy. I am blessed beyond anything I ever deserved." This pregnancy was different from the first, easier in some ways and harder in others. Stella knew what to expect now, which helped, but chasing after an active toddler while growing another baby was exhausting. Owen tried to help as much as possible, but his work kept him busy, especially as tensions in the territory remained high. The second baby, a girl they named Sarah after Owen's mother, arrived in the early winter. Her birth was faster than Samuel's had been, just a few hours of labor before she slid into the world with a lusty cry. Samuel, not quite 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly with his chubby toddler hands. Stella taught for another year before finally admitting that managing 2 small children and a classroom was too much. She resigned her position with regret, though the town found a replacement easily enough. Her days were full nonetheless, caring for Samuel and Sarah, keeping the house, helping Owen with the occasional ranch business that came home with him. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful child who reminded Stella of Owen in temperament. Sarah was her opposite, wild and fearless, climbing everything and laughing in the face of danger. When Sarah was 3, Stella found herself pregnant again, and this time it was twin boys, identical mirror images they named Thomas and Michael. Managing 4 children under the age of 6 would have been overwhelming if not for the community that surrounded them. Mrs. Harrison and the other women helped regularly, and Owen's devotion never wavered. He was as hands-on as any frontier father could be, playing with the children in the evenings and helping put them to bed each night. It was when the twins were 2 years old that Mr. Chisholm approached Owen with a new opportunity. The cattle baron was getting older and wanted to step back from the day-to-day operations of his ranch. He offered Owen a partnership, a chance to buy into the business and eventually take over running it entirely. "It is a huge opportunity," Owen said, discussing it with Stella after the children were asleep. "But it would mean taking on debt, risking everything we have built. I would not do it without your agreement." Stella thought about it carefully, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. They had been careful with money, saving what they could, and Owen had earned a reputation as honest and capable. "I think we should do it," she said finally. "I trust you, Owen. I trust your judgment and your work ethic. We can make this succeed." They signed the partnership agreement the following week, and Owen threw himself into learning every aspect of the cattle business. It was hard work, long days and constant challenges, but he thrived on it. Within 2 years, he had increased the ranch's productivity and profitability significantly. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Samuel loved books and learning, often sitting with Stella while she read to him. Sarah was fascinated by horses and begged to be allowed to ride from the time she could walk. The twins were inseparable, communicating in a language that seemed to belong only to them. Stella sometimes felt overwhelmed by the chaos of their lives, the constant demands of 4 young children and a growing business. But then she would catch Owen's eye across a crowded dinner table, or they would steal a few minutes on the porch after the children were asleep, counting stars and remembering the night they met, and she knew it was all worth it. When Samuel turned 10, he started asking questions about Owen's past. about the guns he still wore on occasion and the careful way he watched their surroundings. Owen answered honestly, not hiding the violence he had been part of but contextualizing it, helping Samuel understand the difference between necessary defense and senseless brutality. "I have done things I regret," Owen told his son seriously. "Things I wish I could change, but I cannot. All I can do is try to be better, to build something good for you and your siblings, to make the world a little safer and kinder than I found it." Samuel absorbed this thoughtfully, and Stella watched the conversation with tears in her eyes. This was the man she had married, the one who counted stars and loved deeply, and tried every day to be better. Life in Lincoln changed as the years passed. The lawlessness that had characterized the town during the Lincoln County War faded into memory. New businesses opened, more families settled, and the rough edges softened into something approaching civilization. Stella watched these changes with satisfaction, knowing she and Owen had played a small part in building something lasting. By the time Sarah was 15, a beautiful young woman who could ride better than most men, Stella and Owen had been married for 17 years. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal challenges, but their love had only deepened with time. It was a warm summer evening when Owen suggested they take a walk, just the two of them, leaving the children in Samuel's capable care. They walked beyond the edge of their property, back to the small rise where Owen had first told her about his past, where so much of their relationship had unfolded. They sat on the same flat rock, shoulders touching just as they had all those years ago, and looked up at the stars. They were still there, still beautiful, still infinite in their mystery. "You ever think about that first night?" Owen asked softly. "When you were counting stars and I interrupted you?" "All the time," Stella admitted. "I think about how lonely I was, how lost. And then you appeared, this gentle man who saw the beauty in what I was doing instead of thinking me foolish. I think about what you said," Owen continued, "about counting being your way of acknowledging things, of saying they matter, and I think about asking you to count me in your forever." "You are counted," Stella said, the same words she had spoken 17 years ago. "Now and always you are counted." "I want to renew our vows," Owen said suddenly. "I know it is not traditional, but I want to stand in front of our children and our friends and promise myself to you all over again." "What do you say?" Stella felt tears slide down her cheeks, though she was smiling. "I say yes. Yes, absolutely yes." They planned a simple ceremony for their 18th wedding anniversary, inviting the whole town just as they had for their first wedding. Their children stood with them this time, Samuel and Sarah and Thomas and Michael, watching as their parents renewed the promises they had made so long ago. Reverend Miller, now quite elderly but still performing his duties, smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife once more. "You may kiss your bride," he said, just as he had 18 years before. Owen did sweetly and thoroughly, and their children groaned in mock embarrassment while the crowd laughed and applauded. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who chose to become a teacher like his mother had been, opening a larger school in Lincoln that served children from miles around. Sarah married a rancher from a neighboring property, a good man who loved her wildness and matched her spirit. The twins went into business together, opening a mercantile that quickly became the heart of the growing town. Owen and Stella grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes, but their love remained as strong as ever. They became grandparents, welcoming Samuel's children and then Sarah's, delighting in the next generation. As Stella approached her 60th year, she sometimes felt the weight of time pressing on her. Her body did not move as easily as it once had. Her vision was not as sharp. But Owen was always there, steady and loving, helping her when she needed it and standing back when she did not. They still counted stars when the weather permitted, though now they did it from comfortable chairs on their porch rather than standing in the cold. Their counts rarely made it past 50 before they got distracted by conversation or simply sat in companionable silence. But that was all right. The counting had never really been the point. It was on a crisp autumn evening, with the sky so clear it seemed to go on forever, that Stella turned to Owen and said, "I want you to know that if I could go back and choose again, I would choose exactly this life. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose you always." Owen took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "And I would choose you. Every single time in every possible world I would choose you." They sat together as the stars came out, counting softly, and Stella thought about forever. They had built one together, had created something lasting and beautiful out of loneliness and hope and love. Their children carried it forward now, and their grandchildren would carry it further still. When Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Stella grieved deeply, but found comfort in the life they had shared. She lived another 5 years, spending them surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the past and watching the future unfold. On her final night, with her family gathered around her bed, she asked them to open the window so she could see the stars. They obliged, and she lay there counting softly, her voice growing fainter with each number. 147, 148, 149, she whispered, the same numbers she had been counting that first night when Owen found her. And then, so quietly that her children almost missed it, she smiled and said, "Count me in your forever." She closed her eyes and was gone, slipping away as peacefully as a sigh. But those who loved her knew that she had not really left, not entirely. She was there in the stars she had loved so much, in the legacy she and Owen had built, in the love that would continue through generations. Years later, when Samuel's grandson asked him about his grandmother, Samuel took the boy outside on a clear night and pointed up at the sky. "Your great-grandmother used to count stars," he said. "She believed in acknowledging beautiful things, in saying they mattered. And she taught us that love, real love, is about counting each other in our forevers." "Can we count them?" the boy asked, his young voice eager. "We can," Samuel said, pulling the child close. "We absolutely can. 1, 2, 3. And so the tradition continued, passed down through generations, a living reminder of a love that had started with stars and a gentle cowboy's request to be counted in forever. In the end, that was what mattered most, not the number of stars or even the years they had together, but the acknowledgment, the recognition that this person, this love, this life together was worth counting, worth cherishing, worth everything. The stars still shone over Lincoln, New Mexico territory, now grown into a proper town with schools and churches and thriving businesses. The land that had once been wild and dangerous was tamed but not broken, still beautiful in its vastness and possibility. And somewhere in that vast sky, if you believed in such things, two souls were together still, counting stars and being counted, forever and always, their love written in the eternal language of starlight.